thank you so much for doing this. This was great. It brings a tear to my eye that you got us started. The longest professional baseball game in history lasted 33 innings and featured 200 total plate appearances. Now, this game occurred in 1981 between the Pawtucket Red Sox and the Rochester Red Wings. I think I was in Rochester at the time, but I wasn't at the game. In the running world, 200 miles represents a challenging ultramarathon distance, highlighting the growing popularity of extreme endurance events. I have a good friend, Peter Trost of the Energy Circle, who is an ultra marathoner. He runs 100 miles fairly regularly. Pekin, Illinois, is celebrating its bicentennial this year, marking its 200th anniversary with a series of events, including parades, concerts, historical reenactments celebrating the rich history of the city and community spirit. Well, Building HVAC Science podcast is celebrating our 200th episode. And in this episode, Eric, Elk, and I welcome Bryan Orr, who is the instigat-ORR behind the creation of Building HVAC Science podcast. We get into his backstory of our podcast, a little bit of my backstory, a little bit of Elk's backstory, and we discuss how podcasting has helped shape our careers, relationships, and even, our businesses. And we emphasize the joy that all three of us share in connecting with people, sharing knowledge, and leaving a legacy. It's a good episode. I had fun with it. I enjoyed being interviewed again, and I am so grateful Bryan planted the thought and was the instigator of the Building HVAC Science podcast. So let's get into this episode, 200 episodes strong, reflecting on the Building HVAC Science journey with Bryan Orr.
Hello and welcome everyone back to the Building HVAC Science podcast. Very special episode today. Eric Kaiser here, Bill Spohn right over there. Bill, you want to tell everybody what the significance of this episode really is?
Well, God willing, this is our 200th episode.
200th. Congratulations. Wow. And I can't take all the credit for it because I haven't been here, hardly at all. But Bill did a lot of work on this. And our special guest today is shall we call him the instigator of this podcast?
Instigator, motivator. Got a lot of titles for him.
That's a good one. Welcome, Mr. Bryan Orr, to the show. And if people don't know who you are, I'm sorry, they're going to have to go find out and listen to your podcast.
Thank you for the introduction. I like to think of myself like I'm an irritant. I'm sort of like a sand spur in your sock. I just don't go away until you do something about it. So I think that was my role that I played in Building HVAC Science.
An instigator, that would be with two R's at the end in order to.
Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly.
Instigator.
Yeah. Wow. I think we just came up with my actual title for everything in my life. I like this.
So part of this, what I wanted to talk about was the origin story for our podcast, but I think it pivots off the origin story for your podcasts. If you could give us some background.
Sure. I've always loved audio ever since I was a little kid. I learned how to read with this audio tapes called Sing, Spell, Read, and Write. And, my mom kind of started off singing the songs with me, but then I learned how to operate the tape deck. And this was when I was 4 or 5 years old. And she would mark the buttons with like little colors and stuff so I'd know what to hit. And I've always just loved audio. I love music, even though I'm not a musician. I always I love memorizing song lyrics. Now, there's just something in my head that's very auditory. And so then, even at a young age, I would do like these little audio dramas on this little tape deck that I had, and I learned how to re-record portions, and even played with cutting tape when I was a kid. Cut the tape and patch it.
Literally cutting tape.
Oh yeah, and it never worked right. No. But I would try it.
I have a visual of doing that before with Scotch tape on the back of it and trying to make like a diagonal slice in it on a cassette tape. Are we talking?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And so that idea of like editing and audio and I got really into sports radio and then talk radio when I was in my teens. And so just always like my parents, we didn't have a TV for a good portion of my childhood, very kind of conservative upbringing. And so I listened to even sports on the radio a lot. So sort of like I grew up in the 50s or something. I don't know, but I always loved that. And then I got into this really busy phase with Kalos where I really felt overwhelmed. I didn't see a path forward. And as I often do, and I've learned as an adult, I didn't know this as a kid, that I'm definitely diagnosable ADHD for sure. And so it's like I needed another outlet. And so a lot of people would say, well, if you've already got so much going on, why would you do more? But like that's almost my way of coping with it, is giving another thing that I can pay attention to. I don't really know how to rest in a normal way. So I started a online startup called Mention Tribe, which I'll go into a whole nother time. It's a whole nother topic. And in order to market that, I started a podcast called The Wow Small Business. Okay, stupid name, but I got a chance to interview a lot of really smart people. And I got connected to a lot of really great people in the podcasting space. So I got to talk to a lot of my heroes and meet a lot of cool people. Produced a podcast for that conference, podcast movement, which is more narrative. I did some stringer work for NPR and Radiotopia and WNYC and This American Life and those sorts of podcasts and radio shows, and which was just a lot of fun. I took my kids with me a lot of times. I interviewed the original audio podcaster or audio producer for the sounds and music for Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer with Alex when he was a little kid. He went with me and got to meet that guy. I just got to do a lot of fun things. That was for NPR's Marketplace. I did that. And so just did a lot of stuff that was really fun and interesting. But then at some point it's like, all right, this isn't really making any money. Everybody's looking at me. Why are you taking all this time to do this? And thought, all right, well, let's put some of my trainings up online and use the editing skills I've developed and have some fun with that. And the response was really, really strong on the HVAC side. So I've sort of taken all that kind of hobby effort and just applied it to HVAC and training, something I'm also very passionate about.
Would you say podcasting has influenced your business life, your business track, the arc of the business?
I mean, for sure. There's no question. And again, like the thing I always say when people ask about this, it's not like podcasting is special in this way. It's more just applying interest and passion. It's not being like focus is so in vogue right now. People talk about you just need to focus, plot a path and just focus on that path and don't do anything else. And there's a lot of wisdom in that for seasons, but there's also a lot of wisdom sometimes in just lifting your head up and looking at the world around you and doing things that you really enjoy. And then if you're open to finding ways that fits together, then often it just does sort of magically. And in that, there's been 50 failures to every one success. But undoubtedly, the podcast has massively affected my business. I mean, there's so many people who work at Kalos today who originally, were introduced to me through the podcast and then through the YouTube channel and everything else. So yeah, there's no way we would be where we are today without making that silly choice to start throwing some trainings up on the internet.
There's some parallels here to my experience. I asked for a tape recorder for my 11th birthday and received it in the hospital because I was recovering from an appendectomy. So
it's a perfect time for a tape recorder.
Yeah, my siblings saying happy birthday to me on this little Panasonic tape recorder. So tape recorders and me and you the same way. And I also had this vision from in high school of being an editor of Popular Science magazine, taking technology and explaining it to people. Yeah. And I feel like I've reached that point in my life through this podcast and other things through my work efforts too. So it was very much a natural for me. And you didn't know all that when you asked me to consider this.
Yeah, and I guess I want to, when we get to this, I want to ask you why you decided to say yes to that, because it was again one of those at the time maybe didn't make as much sense as a lot of things that you would do in business. And I guess I will just ask that question. Like at the time we were doing the Blue Collar Roots Network. So there's a lot of people involved in that. Most of those podcasts still exist. And you were one of the first ones that I thought of to do that because you do have this like NPR voice. I love the diversity in the podcasting and media space. Yeah. And you have this style that I could never replicate. And like most people can't. Oh. It's a patient cadence. It's a warm, inviting way of speaking. That people are naturally attracted to, or at least feel very comfortable with. And I don't know if you saw that at the time, but yeah, would you talk to like why you said yes to doing that, or decided to make the leap?
I think it was, and I think I have a little bit of the ADHD, if I pronounce that correctly, thing going on in my life, because I'm always looking for something new to latch onto. But I'm trying to be more careful about what I'm leaving behind. Things that promises I made. I'm always try to be considerate of promises I made to people and to myself to fulfill those before leaving something behind. But it's hard when you want to jump around to things. But it seemed like a natural, and you were very kind, and you did a couple of Loom videos and provided some resources, some of which I still use today to create the podcast, and just made it easy. And it's gotten easier. And now with Elk on board, he's backed me up and done some solo when I couldn't do them, so we can continue to produce one every week. And actually 2024 was our first year of 52 weeks of podcast. So we hit one every week, and that's not an easy thing to do. I can say from personal experience, but I agree to do it because I think I did get good feedback from in-person presentations. I'm like, this is just another way of reaching more people and doing it asynchronously. So they don't have to show up someplace. It can be anywhere, anytime, as long as I have something interesting to say. I also think the idea of something interesting to say, it's like when people ask me, what's the theme of your show? I know you coached me to write something. You may have even written like what the little header is there in the podcast apps. But I feel it's like anything that's interesting to me, that's who I want to talk to. And I think Eric's picked up on that. How do you see why we do this, Eric, or why I did this?
Well, from the outside, when it started, it felt to me like a lot of what you just said, that you were talking about things that were really interesting to you, and one of those things was actually connecting building HVAC, building science and HVAC. So making that realistic connection between those two, and it really came across well. And I'm going to echo what Bryan said too earlier. Like, your voice and your cadence is like, I just want to invite you into my living room and have you sit in a corner and read a book to me, because it's just that comfortable.
Jeez.
But it really was that for me, listening to it, and you brought some things to my attention, I know, in the industry early on that I wasn't aware of, and some different thought processes about how to look at different problems or different scenarios in different ways. And, I'm lucky enough, Bryan was really the first podcast. The HVAC School podcast was the first one I was ever on. And I've been a guest on a lot of them. And then when starting here, you asked me to co-host this, it really made sense to me because I've got a similar passion to bring new things to the trade, to look at new things, to investigate new things and share those with people. And then hopefully bring enough information that people can apply all that stuff, or at least a significant part of what's being brought forth, into something that they're doing, or share it with somebody else who can apply it.
Yeah. And I've used the word abundance mentality several times in the last couple of weeks. Bryan's smiling. Why does it make you smile?
It's something that I say all the time. Yeah.
Explain it from your perspective.
Sure.
Please.
I'm trying to think of the last time this came up. I know. It was actually I did the training class on inverter technology at Mid-Florida Tech, our Mid-Florida Career College, that AHR kind of sponsored. So Medea donated a bunch of equipment, and so we brought it in and did a class, Roman and I. And one of the questions was, how do you stay ahead of your competitors? And I just laughed. It's like, I literally do not think that way. And it's not because I'm not a competitive person, because I am. If I'm playing football, I want to win, or whatever. Even tossing the ball around the backyard. Ask my kids. It gets a little violent.
See their bruises.
Just kidding. And it doesn't mean you're not competitive, but when you think about things from that wide view, like, I want to help them. Like, I want to help train their employees. I want to be a force for good in their businesses, because I'm not at all afraid of them beating me in the larger sense. Sure, if we're both competing on a job, I want to win the job, they want to win the job, that's fine. But afterwards, we go out and get coffee or a drink and enjoy the conversation, right? That's how I think about it. And abundance is that way. It's like there's always opportunity for people who care about doing good work and care about bringing good into the world. So just do a bunch of that. And yeah, you've got to tend to the details, and there's going to be these little moments of competition. But in the large, you don't need to play life like it's a zero-sum game. Like if someone else wins, then that means I lose, because that's just not how it works. It just isn't fundamentally how it works. There are some little buckets or spaces where sometimes it works that way, but that's definitely the exception, not the rule. The rule is that if you put good things into the world and you do good work and you support other people and you help other people, then that does return in very practical ways, where people want to help you, and and supporting people and bringing good people together is always a win. And that's something that I really believed fundamentally when I started the podcast, and even when I started Kalos, and that's just been proven true time and time again. And it doesn't. The risk is always that there's always these little exceptions that pop up, and it can make you jaded, and it can make you start to believe that you have to hoard your gold like a dragon sitting on top of it, striking down all the knights who are coming to steal it from you, instead of recognizing that, like, there are no dragons, there are no knights. There's just what we have, and when we share it openly, it really does a lot of good for society and for us.
I think, Elk, you've heard me mention it several times in context of TruTech, that if we truly believe in our mission, we have to support people that help the business, that help the world change as we'd like to see it change. And those may be competitors doing that, but good for them. Well, let's keep on doing our job and keeping our perspectives. I think, perhaps that's what you're saying in part, Bryan, is that you don't have to worry about it so much because you're going to approach it in your own way.
Yeah, I would agree with that too. And if we help everybody else around us learn and help them grow as well, it just validates what we're doing. Yeah. Because if they see a value in that, then they want to know more too. And realistically, that makes it easier for all of us to move forward if everybody's moving in the same direction. If one person's kind of fighting, or one organization is kind of fighting to go in this one direction, and everybody else wants to try to hold them back, well, it just slows everybody down. But if everybody starts moving in the same direction, it's momentum. And by putting a lot of this information out there, sharing this information, I think it starts moving everybody in a similar direction.
Yeah, for sure. It triggers a lot of thoughts in me, and I have to be careful which tangent I go off on here. But I had a business coach who used to say, and I think I've told you this before, Bill. He used to say, fundamentally, business is an excuse to be in relationship with other people.
Wow.
And I don't know that that's true of everyone, but it certainly is true for me. It is a way that I get to have a context for friendship and for collaboration and ultimately relationship, that give and take, that flow, that exchange of ideas and knowledge and all of that. I mean, because ultimately, I think that sometimes we play up the problem like maybe it's a little bigger than it is. Sometimes, the world, these houses are all falling down everywhere, and people are all dying in their homes and all this stuff. It's like, look, the reality is that if any of us weren't here, the world would move on.
Right.
Everything would be okay in one sense. But really, honestly, being able to do what we do, being able to share what we know or what we've experienced or whatever the path we're on is a great joy. It's something we get to do. It's not something we have to do. And when you look at business that way, that's a big part of that abundance mindset. It's like waking up every morning and saying, like, oh gosh, I have to do this. Everyone's counting on me. And instead flipping that and saying, no, I get to do this. I get to share a little bit of myself. I get to share a little bit of my experience. Maybe somebody can connect with it. Maybe somebody can learn from it. And that's really worth it. That's the sort of stuff you're going to look back on and never regret. And that's something I've always had in the back of my head around podcasting or business or anything. It's like, is my future self or myself, when I'm at the last leg of my life, am I going to be able to look back and say, man, I'm really glad I did that? And that's one thing, kind of universally true about podcasting. I don't think there's anything that I've done in this space or that you've done in this space that is going to be something that you regret having done. I mean, again, I guess if you're taking time away from your kids or something, but I think we've both done a pretty good job of integrating our lives around this. I mean, obviously you get to work with your son. I get to work with my kids and my spouse to some degree. It kind of solves a lot of those problems that I think a lot of people would see of like, well, you're taking time away from this or that.
Right.
But it is something to consider, obviously.
I mean, I like the get to do versus have to do. You mentioned that recently somewhere in a written form. I can't recall exactly where, but I've made mental note of that. That is a really good one, really good phrase. Elk, sorry, go ahead.
Well, I mean, I was going to say, in a way, yeah, you might be taking away time immediately, but you're also leaving something behind for them.
Mhm.
Especially in a space like this, you're leaving a lot of knowledge behind, not only for them, but for people around them that can support them and that they can use and others can use around them. So I kind of look at it like it's a benefit. It might not be an immediate benefit, but years down the road, they might look back on that and go, wow, look at all he left behind for me.
Yeah. So where do we hear some of your old stuff? Speaking
Oh
of things
boy.
you might be embarrassed of.
I have republished some. I have republished some of my old Wow Small Business stuff on HVAC School over the years, and I don't know that I necessarily called it out that that's what it was, but I did. Like for example, Ruth King was one of my early Wow Small Business interviews, and I didn't even know she specialized in the HVAC space. I'm not
Wow.
sure how we connected. I think she had a publicist reach out or something, and so I scheduled it, and then that's how I really met Ruth. That's how. And she's now helped our business tremendously in many different ways. I think she caught on halfway through that I wasn't really interviewing her. I was more so asking for business advice. So I got some free advice out of it. So yeah, there's lots of examples of that. There was another one that I did that was kind of on the business front. A lot of different stuff like that. But if you really want to hear some embarrassing stuff, go to Podcast Movement Sessions and look at the first season. So, and this is kind of fun for me because I actually really fun, like it's weird how you forget things that you do. And this wasn't that long ago. I mean, it wasn't like, I don't know, it was like maybe 8 years ago, something like that. But my kids were all young and I used them for a lot of the intros and outros and even the ad reads. I would have my kids do it, which is so like, why on earth did I do that? I mean, this is the largest podcasting conference in the world and I'm having my kids do the ad reads. But it's great because now I can use that audio to make fun of them or to, embarrass them. And so I've been doing that. I've been pulling the clips and just like sending it to my oldest son and my daughters and stuff it's super cute. But anyway, so that's one place you can hear it. But I've done a lot of other stuff too. I did a podcast called Accelerator for a local startup accelerator in Orlando. I don't know if that's still up or not. I did a season for the local jobs board, Career Source Central Florida. And I really I love the narrative form. So where you write and like you actually sort of, you heavily edit and you're kind of pulling clips and all that sort of that, Radio Lab, This American Lifestyle type of podcast. And really that medium is just dying off. Like it's harder and harder to find that sort of podcast anymore because it is very time consuming and very expensive to make that sort of show. But I love that type of form. So if you listen to any of those, you'll hear me really trying to pull that off. And I realize it's just not like, I just don't have the time nor the budget to really nail it. So it's kind of embarrassing, but I still love doing it.
You did one about something about the national forests and a firefighter. Am I recalling correctly?
Yeah, it was the guy who got struck by lightning, like 13 times or something.
Park ranger.
That we called it the Spark Ranger. Yep, I did that with Jody Mayberry, who actually was a park ranger and actually has some podcasts that are designed for park rangers. Good friend of mine through podcasting. There's a lot of people that I've known over the years that have been really influential in my life just through podcasting. One of the recent examples was that Washington Post article that was written about me. Came from a guy who I interviewed at Podcast Movement Sessions, and he just would talk about me apparently at conferences or just different things. He's sort of a media guy. Stephen Goldstein is his name. And that's how the guy from Washington Post picked up my story, I guess. I mean, if it's a story. It's funny to me that they thought it was a story. That's kind of telling. But it was that sort of stuff still happens to this day, which is kind of fun, which just proves that, like, being connected to people, having those kind of cocktail conversations do often end up paying off in ways that you don't expect.
I've moved down that road to much more limited extent, but shortly after I started Building HVAC Science, the marketing manager from ResNet came to me and said, we'd like to start a podcast. So I said, hey, I just learned how, and I wrote this really long Word doc that explained everything to do. I said, here's how you do it. I'm happy to help you get started, just like you did for me. Mm-hmm. They looked at it and went, holy crap, would you like to do it? I guess I made it sound complicated enough, or it made sense to me somehow. So I have been doing the Res Talk podcast since 2018, I think, which was shortly after I started this one. And then recently, some people know I purchased an electric vehicle from a company that's gone bankrupt called Fisker. And that's the last time I'm going to say his name, the guy that bankrupted the company. But the owners of the cars have gotten together and formed literally an international nonprofit to carry forward support for the vehicle, for parts, for software and things like that. And I've been interacting with them for the last half year. And it just occurred to me, sort of like it did with you. So in January, we're going to start Ocean Currents. The vehicle's called the Ocean. So we're going to start the Ocean Currents podcast. So again, I'm doing it just out of pure passion and wanting to connect. And just going back to the thing about people and business, the excuse for businesses is to interact with people. So we share that.
Yeah, there's so many. Like I forgot to mention the Dialed In podcast, the Obsessed Garage podcast that I did for a long time. Yeah. That's another one. If you want to hear me really making a fool of myself, literally doing co-hosting a podcast about a topic that I didn't give a crap about just because I was helping a friend. But yeah, I've met all kinds of people through that. I mean, like a bunch of people from all around the country who are all into cars, and I don't have that in common. But it's weird because I'm still like the de facto HVAC expert in that group, and people will still, email me and ask questions about whatever, which isn't necessarily helpful, but it is interesting how that all happens. And I think, a lot of people look at that and they'll ask, advice around it, air quotes, advice. Like, well, what do I do? And it's like, man, you have to balance all this stuff. Like, I don't want to be the guy who goes out and gives this message. I guess I'm sort of giving a caveat here. Saying like, try a bunch of different things, do all kinds of different stuff, because for some people that just doesn't work for their life. The way that their life is structured, that's just not going to be practical. And intrinsic to my ability to do this has always been, for anybody who knows Leilani, knows how little, and I know this almost sounds bad, but how little I have to do in my personal life because she essentially project manages and executes our personal lives so effectively. And that isn't, I mean, it sounds like me just bragging on her, but it is a reality. And so she's always been very supportive of all this other crazy that I do, which has allowed for that to occur. And that doesn't mean that if somebody else's situation is different, that it's somehow worse than mine. It's just a reality. Like, you have to know who you're doing life with and whether this stuff is going to work. But finding places and spaces that you can express yourself and connect with people that are maybe a little different and maybe don't make sense, sometimes I think is a really healthy thing, and it's definitely benefited me.
So is it is it true to say it's the aspect of giving without the expectation of receiving?
Yeah, expectation is just one of those things in general to just do away with, right? Like, which is totally different than making a plan, right? I talked about this in the book that I wrote, Unconformed, is like the difference when your parents have standards versus expectations. Like, standards are really healthy. Like even in business, things, like having SOPs, standard operating procedures, and having high standards and having really good mission statement and all that's really important. But having high expectations of people is just, all it does is lead to disappointment. Expectations are a direct road to disappointment. And it may seem nuanced, but it has a lot to do with your emotional posturing around something. Standards are something you do with people, and expectations are something you have for people, or you put on people. That's another phrase Leilani always says whenever I start to get a little too that way. She's like, "Don't put that on me, don't put your expectation on me. I'm not accepting that." And it's really good. It's a good reminder all the time that we really have to, in any business thing, anything that we're doing, when we have expectations, we're going to get disappointed. Versus if you're looking for something that's far enough out that you can triangulate with other people, you're achieving a goal together with other people. You found a true north and you're walking towards it together. That's where community happens. That's where joy happens. That's where you get to operate in that get to versus have to.
But I want to, this is like way off topic, but I'm going to explore that a little bit with you. I think for different people, who lack experience or who have bad experience, expectation setting, or at least expectation discussion, is important. Because if you just say, do your best job, their best job may not be what you're expecting at all. So And I think you're not saying like singularly, this is the mode to operate my whole life in, but you're talking about, sort of moving into and out of different modes of operation.
Yeah, it's sort of like, so a lot of this is just the meaning of words, right? And so sometimes I'll kind of redefine a word to suit me, or create a pretend juxtaposition between two words that are actually essentially synonyms. So watch out for that. It's very popular nowadays, and I do fall into that trap sometimes. But let me give an example of what I mean. Everybody knows that giving an ultimatum is something that you don't do in a relationship, right? That you don't do in a relationship that you want to actually sustain. Now, saying that, are there cases where you have to give an ultimatum? Of course, right? There are extreme situations where you're like, hey, you need to stop doing this, otherwise I have to do this, right? There are cases where you have to do that, but you know that that's not the normal way you want to operate. If you operate in giving people ultimatums all the time, people aren't going to want to be around you. They're not going to want to do business with you. It's not going to work. And I think that's kind of what I'm saying here, even about expectations. There's a way of framing expectations, which is more about, no, this has to happen, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like this is what has to happen. But it's a collaborative working towards this. It's not this, hey, every day you have to show up like a robot and do these things. And if you don't, then you're not going to work here, right? And you see that if you work at a place, for example, I'm using business as an example for this, but podcasting or anything that you do collaboratively is this way. If you work at a place where you know that the expectations are so rigid, there's no room for individuality, there's no room for flexibility. Hey, my kid got sick today. I just can't hit my goals for this week because literally I had to be home. We got the flu, whatever. And the kind of boss that says, that's not my problem. I had my expectation. You've got to meet it. My deadline, that stuff just doesn't work for humans. Versus saying, what's the point? Well, the point is that here's the production levels. That this is our goal. This is our production level goal. This is what our standard is. There's going to be times that you're not going to meet that. That's fine. But there should also be times that you exceed that. That's a reasonable expectation. And that's the kind of thing I'm talking about, not this dogmatic, you'd never use the word expectations, because I'll even say in business, our goal is to exceed our clients' expectations versus meet them. That sort of, under promise, over deliver way of being is a huge part of being good at business or a podcast or any sort of friendship relationship that you have.
And I think, part of that, what you're saying there is there's the explanation of why you expect this. It come along on my mental journey, look at my map, appreciate where I'm coming from, because that builds relationship, and that I think builds sort of like future performance, if you want to call it that.
Yeah, ultimately, anything you do with people, whether it's business or creative endeavors like this or anything, people have to trust your intent, because your execution is never going to be perfect over the long run. And because of negative bias, like we all have negative cognitive bias, which means that not all, but most, there are these sort of like, glass half full always people. But the vast majority of people, when something bad happens, you overvalue that compared to the good. You focus on the bad. And so, for example, when you've been around somebody for 10 years, the opportunity for them to feel really screwed by the relationship is high, right? And when that happens, there's a huge opportunity to really feel taken advantage of and to kind of destroy everything. And so when you recognize that, when you go back to that kind of having intentions, core fundamental whys that you have met out time after time after time, that people can see demonstrated over and over and over again, that's what helps carry you through. Whereas if there has been any story that's been painted about having poor intentions or doing it for money or doing it for personal gain or doing it for whatever, people they're gonna cling to that and they're gonna run with that. I'm navigating this right now. I'm not gonna say who it is, but there's an industry person right now that I'm navigating this whole story about me and what my intentions are and whatever. And the reason why I know we're gonna get through it is because both of us have established what our intentions are through our actions for a really long time. And that's why you can be patient with that. But that's how this all works, right? Like there's nobody who says about Bill Spohn that Bill Spohn is a selfish guy who is only doing it for the money. Nobody says that. Well, why? You're a businessman, right? You collect money. Heck, I think I just bought $7,000 worth of tools 3 days ago from you. And I have no qualms doing that, right? Sorry, I shouldn't have said dollar amount, but like I have no qualms doing that. Because I know it's going to an organization that I believe in, that I trust. I fundamentally trust. That doesn't mean that every single thing you do I'm going to like. It doesn't mean every single thing you do I'm going to agree with. But that trust of your intentions carries me through. And I think that's the thing to always seek. It's like from an objective observer, as much as we can imagine, how are our intentions going to come across? How is what we're doing going to be seen? Not even just the intentions of our own heart, because if we don't tend to how that's actually perceived, then the perception becomes reality. And I think that's something to always tend to in business and in relationships. Hold that very sacred. And you're going to make mistakes, but that will be that inertia, that flywheel that will pull you through those hard times with people.
But don't let the friction of thinking about all of the possibilities drag you down, because then that diminishes your action.
Yeah,
and that becomes draining on the person too. How do we get talking about this stuff?
That's what always happens with me. I don't know. When we get together, it's a thing.
Do we need to have an alternate title for this podcast called the Rabbit Hole Podcast?
Yeah.
I'm getting worse. That's the thing. Like, it's crazy. I didn't realize, like, I'm 42 now. I just turned 42. And like, man, my old man stage has come on fast, where I just like go down rabbit trails. Nobody cares. I watch their eyes glazing over. And I'm like, I don't know. Let's talk about the football game, something else, because it's getting deep in here. It always happens. I apologize.
Don't apologize. That's you, and I love it. Thank you.
I think all three of us are in that same boat on this podcast, perhaps. So, no hurt feelings here.
You want to ask more questions, Bryan? I mean, it's
absolutely for you. So, how has this journey changed for you? I mean, I know we started off, and it was, building HVAC science. So it was a lot of same for me, where you start with like, all right, there's some low-hanging fruit here, some things that I'm going to tackle right away. But I'm sure that's evolved over time. What does that look like?
A lot lately has been things that I, again, find interesting. And many of the new guests that come from LinkedIn. Somebody's gotten into some dialogue or conversation or some kind of post. I'm like, that is really darn interesting. And I just make the invitation, or Eric does the same thing. We're both on that framework. And also people we meet like at the symposium, at AHR, at Building Science Summer Camp, just lining those people up. And then once you have, 200 episodes like we're talking about today, there's people who we like to go back and get updates on their story. So we kind of bring it forward with a new framework. I've also talked with or get very passionate about entrepreneurial operating system, EOS. Had some people on to talk about that. And so, the business side, the science side, all kind of comes together.
Yeah. I mean, we do, we talk about the personal side too, with people, individuals' journeys and how they got there, and, hoping that can help other people to work along their own personal journey, and sharing successes and failures, because I love to say that it's easier to learn from somebody else's failures than your own.
Less painful, perhaps.
Yeah, less painful.
All right, so you're 200
expensive.
episodes in, which is a massive milestone. What's your top couple pieces of advice, one or two pieces of advice that you would give somebody who's considering starting a creative endeavor? Because I know you don't leap without thinking. I mean, you're definitely I'm a little more quick to just be like, all right, just do it. You tend to be more thoughtful, which is something I really appreciate about you. And so I'm sure there's a lot of people who are standing on the sidelines in that thoughtful phase, considering leaping. What advice would you give them?
I would say set some markers of quality that you'd like to achieve. One of mine is audio quality. So actually, we have a guest coming up next month who didn't have a headset mic, just like a simple USB mic. I bought one, sent it, and said, I don't care, just use it, enjoy. But that audio quality is really important, because I don't want to make it any more irritating to listen to than it has to be. Second one is, I think, cadence is one of my goals was to do it weekly, and we've finally achieved that. There were some periods in between. I mean, do the math, 7 years, 200 episodes. That doesn't work out to 52 a year for much of that period. Although it got better. I think I made a commitment, like a New Year's resolution in 23, and we did better. And then 24, we hit the goal. So set a goal that way about cadence. And I believe you probably know more about this than I do, but I think anything less than monthly, you're really not doing anything. It's sort of random. And then the sort of the mean part of me looks at that says like, that's not what I'm going to do. When I see that happening, it's like you're doing something totally random. Very fortunate to have an editor, a paid professional editor that you introduced me to, still works with me. And that is just a godsend in terms of being as picky as I am about the audio and as Eric is about the audio, to make sure that it all comes together. And, some people have said, oh, you make me sound smart. Well, it's like, no, that's the audio editor that makes you sound smart. So I got those are the things. And also if you can afford it, because it does, there is a little bit of expense. Some of the expense is time, and some of the expense is just content. And so doing it weekly, it's like, I got to do something this week, or I got to prepare for the next 3 weeks and make sure there's things that are in the queue, but don't lose the quality aspect of what you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, that's good stuff. Yeah, whenever you start, there's this assumption that, okay, well, hey, look, I was able to do 5 weeks in a row. Man, I'm going to be able to keep this up. But man, there are times that it's really hard. And it's something that people get into it, not really counting the costs. I mean, I've been doing 2 episodes a week, gosh, for, I don't know, a long time. And it's a lot. And so building a team, building a support structure around what you're going to do is incredible and makes a huge difference. But then you have to count the monetary costs. Mm-hmm. And that's one of those things. Are you going to commit to it or aren't you? And is there opportunity in it to help compensate for that and all that? Those are all things you got to think through. You don't have to, but I would encourage you to. But also don't be afraid then. Ultimately, once you do it, then just do it. And if you do it and it doesn't work out, like the probably 15 other podcast projects I started and went for a while on and stopped, it's okay. It's not the end of the world when that happens. It's not ideal, but it's not the end of the world. But yeah, I'm super proud of you and all the others who kind of came out of Blue Collar Roots. And in one sense, the Blue Collar Roots was a failure, right? Like we didn't stick together. We didn't do the original plan, but in a much broader sense and that sort of abundance mindset sense, I think it was a huge success. And it makes me feel all warm and fuzzy, just seeing how well everybody's done. I mean, like really, it's like anything you do in life. One of the most rewarding things in the world is to just be able to kind of in yourself say, yeah, I had a tiny part in that, right? Mm-hmm. Just a little nudge, or just an encouraging word, or just something. Like I'm not taking credit for it, but just like they did all the work, but I just had a little tiny part in that. That's a really great feeling, and thank you for allowing me to be part of this journey. It's been a great honor and a lot of fun, and a lot of really great podcasts too. I'm a listener. I don't listen to every one, certainly, but sure. But a lot of really great content that keeps me up to speed on things that honestly I'm not engaged in every day. So super helpful.
Good.
Where do you see this going in the future? We're talking about past and present, and where's the future go?
Yeah, I think it's going to be hard for me to stop entirely because I enjoy it too much. I look forward to it, but I also realize it's a time commitment. So depending on other things going on, it's this is strained. But once I'm into it, once I'm engaged with it, I have a lot of fun. So I see it continuing on, but maybe with, from the TruTech side, with me stepping back and you, Eric, taking on more. So me being more the sidecar than the driver. That's where I see it going.
All right. Well, you heard that here, folks.
Being on the sidecar always looks fun. I think I look forward to that too. Letting somebody else drive, and as long as you trust the driver, it's all good.
Right, and you can take off the helmet and let your hair blow in the breeze.
Yeah, gosh. Yeah.
No, it's not going to happen.
Well, you can let your head blow in the breeze.
Well, want to be respectful of everyone's time here, but definitely appreciate you coming on. I mean, I texted you and you said yes almost immediately. I don't think there's any hesitation. You probably just didn't get the text. I would thank you so much for doing this. This was great. It brings a tear to my eye that you got us started.
Yeah, no, it's been awesome. And again, it's always a yes for this sort of thing with you. It's getting me to actually do it is the hard part, but you wrangled me and made it happen. So I appreciate that. I'm very grateful to you. I'm very grateful to, you and Eric are like top of the list for me in terms of my gratitude of just people who have invested and been willing to kind of hang with me through this insane way that I am at times, because it isn't always easy. And you guys do such great work and are been really great mentors to me in so many ways. So I could tell story after story of the ways that you guys have invested in me and have been patient with me. I have a couple for you, Eric, that I'll tell you sometime, of just things that have stuck with me and have really helped me in a lot of ways. So, yeah, thanks so much thanks so much for doing this and continuing to do it. I want to see this thing go on for as long as it possibly can, on all the fronts, because I think it's just good. It's fundamentally good and only adds good to the world. So good on you for doing it, and congrats for 200. It's amazing.
Thank you. Hey, plug the symposium.
Oh, yeah. Symposium. Sure. I mean, this year it's a little different. We're doubling the size of the symposium. So we're going to have closer to about 500 people. We have a new location in Ocoee, closer to the convention center, just to make it easy for people going to AHR. We shortened it to 2 days, which has been a bummer because we're not able to have as many speakers. So I'm getting a lot of those emails right now. Hey, if you're one of those people, I love you. It's not that I don't love you. It's just we have limited spots this year. But there's going to be more people. It's going to be a lot of fun. There are still actually some tickets available.
Nice.
They're not very many, but there are a few. And so if you go to hvacrschool.com, you can go up to the events tab and you can find the symposium there, or hvacrschool.com/symposium to get your tickets. The virtual is going to be great again this year, as always. It's going to be a little different because it's not going to come out like live for some of it. We're going to do the main stage live. The others we're going to post same day. After they've been kind of processed, just to save some bandwidth at the convention center. Or at the Ocoee Center. But yeah, it's going to be great. And we love to see everybody there. It's going to be a lot of fun. Be a little different. We've got a new campus for Kalos that'll be here in the next 2 years. And so the symposium is going to have a new home in probably the next 2 years-ish, that will really allow us to all park in the same place. And it's going to kind of up the level. It's going to be a lot of fun. So it's the little things, man. It's always the little things. Like not having
got to happen in the real world,
It is.
That's so exciting, and I'm so happy to hear that you're planning on continuing that, because it's an event that I just get excited about and look forward to every year.
Yeah, no, it's great. It's a great honor to be that kind of little catalyst that allows everything else to form around and everybody to do such great things to the symposium. It's a real honor. So love it.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Bryan, for joining us, and thank you, Elk, for taking part in this. And to everyone else, we wish you this is gonna come out post holidays, but we wish you the best every time, all the time.
Thanks, Bill.
Thanks.
Thanks again for tuning in to the Building HVAC Science podcast. If you're not subscribed, please consider doing so, and share this podcast, man. Share it out there. There's a lot of other great trade-related resources and influencers out there, including Service Business Mastery, Quality HVAC, HVAC Overtime, HVACR videos, the HVAC Grapevine, HomeDiagnosis.tv, AC Service Tech, Measure Quick, HVA Chicks, the Misfits of HVAC, HVACR School, talked about that a lot this episode, HVAC Shop Talk, Stephen Reardon, HVAC Reefer Guy, and Tool Pros. If you're in the market for any tools or test instruments, go to TruTechTools.com, TruTechTools.com, and use the offer code HVACBS for a nice discount. This podcast is a production of TruTech Tools Limited, and full disclosure, I'm the owner of TruTech, and the opinions voiced are those of my guests, my co-host, or myself, depending on who is speaking. We hope you enjoyed this episode on the reflections of the Building HVAC Science podcast journey with Bryan Orr. Until next time, take care. We'll do it again at 300 and 400, okay? Yeah.